For the last few years, I've been working as a night security guard at a mall in the middle of nowhere. It used to be that the place didn't even need someone on the night shift, but things started to get a little out of hand with vandalism. You know, teenagers tagging walls, kids messing around in the parking lot, stuff like that. Honestly, most nights were dead boring. I'd drive around the parking lot in my old sedan, listening to the radio and sipping coffee to stay awake. Every once in a while, I'd chase off some skateboarders or give the stink eye to someone hanging around the entrance a little too long. But that was about it. That all changed about 3 months in. It was a little past 2 a.m., and I was doing my usual loop through the parking lot when I noticed something odd. A light was on in one of the stores. It caught me off guard because, well, I hadn't seen a single soul all night. I parked my car near the main entrance and stepped inside the mall. The place always felt eerie at night with the way your footsteps echoed off the empty walls. As I got closer to the store, I noticed the gate was still down, locked tight, but the lights were blazing inside. No sound, no movement, nothing. I rattled the gate just to see if someone would pop their head up and confess to being there. Nada. After a few minutes of standing there, I chalked it up to a timer glitch or something. I went back to my car, trying not to think too hard about it, but as soon as I started driving toward the other side of the mall, I saw another light turn on inside. Same thing. Locked gate, no one around. This time, I felt my stomach tighten a bit. Maybe someone was screwing with me, but who would go through that much trouble? I parked and walked back into the mall, this time with my flashlight out. The second store was just as quiet as the first, but I swear I saw a shadow flicker behind one of the racks. I called out, "Hey, I know you're in there." My voice echoed through the empty space, but no answer came back. When I shined my flashlight around, it caught on one of the mannequins. For a second, I could have sworn its head was turned toward me. I laughed it off. I mean, I was running on fumes after pulling 2 double shifts this week. My brain was probably just messing with me. But as I turned to leave, I heard a soft click behind me. The light in the store had turned off. I froze. It was dead silent except for my own breathing. I whipped around, shining my flashlight into the darkened store. For just a split second, I saw what looked like someone crouching behind the counter. I felt my throat tighten, but when I moved closer, there was nothing there. "Get it together, man," I whispered to myself, rubbing my face. Maybe the lack of sleep was making me see things. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I stepped outside into the parking lot again, my car's interior light was on. That's when I knew for sure. Something was off. I stood frozen, staring at my car from across the lot. My first thought was that maybe I'd left the light on when I got out. It wouldn't have been the first time my brain short-circuited after pulling back-to-back shifts. But as I walked closer, I could see movement, just a flicker, through the car's windows. My gut twisted. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was inside. I gripped my flashlight a little tighter, mustering whatever courage I had left, and approached the driver's side door. "All right, enough screwing around," I yelled. "Get out of my car now." No response. I reached for the door handle and yanked it open. Empty. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I climbed inside to turn off the light, but as soon as I did, I felt it. A heavy, ice-cold chill spreading through the car. It wasn't like the AC was on or anything. It was this unnatural, bone-deep cold that made my teeth chatter. And then the static started. The radio flicked on all by itself, tuning to a station that wasn't even programmed. It was just white noise, crackling and hissing like a bad TV signal. I smacked the power button, but it didn't stop. Something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw a shadow, a tall, dark figure standing just outside the car. I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. I'd had enough. I threw the car into drive and peeled out of the lot. I didn't go back to the mall for a few days after that. I called in sick even though I knew my boss would probably dock my pay for it. I just needed time to shake off whatever the hell had happened that night. When I finally returned, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Lack of sleep, stress. But deep down, I wasn't buying it. It was a slow winter night, and my boss had me checking the plumbing because, apparently, saving money on maintenance was part of my job description now. I wandered through the empty mall with a flashlight and a wrench, listening to the faint hum of the heating vents. Eventually, nature called, and I made my way to one of the bathrooms. As I pushed the door open, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a toilet flushing. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking a little. Nothing. I checked each stall, one by one, but they were all empty. My nerves were shot, but I figured it must have been the motion sensor acting up. I decided to use the last stall, trying to shake off the weird vibe. As I sat there scrolling through my phone, I heard it, a soft tapping sound. It was coming from the stall next to mine. I leaned over to look under the divider and nearly dropped my phone. A pair of shoes was standing there, toes pointing directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I tilted my head up, and there he was, a tall, gaunt man peering over the top of the stall. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale as death, and his lips were stretched into the most unsettling grin I'd ever seen. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just sat there, frozen in terror, as he stared down at me. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he ducked back down. I jumped up, kicking the stall door open, but when I looked inside, it was empty. Nothing but a pair of shoes lying perfectly still on the floor. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I bolted out of the bathroom, wrench and flashlight forgotten, and sprinted for my car. When I got in, I locked the doors and sat there, shaking uncontrollably. It was 4 a.m. by the time I finally calmed down enough to drive home. It took everything I had to show up for work the next night. I told myself over and over, "It's just your mind playing tricks on you. Lack of sleep, stress, nothing's real." But deep down, I wasn't buying it. That night, I decided to stick to patrolling the parking lot. No more going inside unless I absolutely had to. At least out in the open, I felt like I could see things coming. Around 3 a.m., I was parked near the main entrance, sipping my coffee, when I noticed someone standing in the shadows near the far corner of the lot. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. I rolled down my window and yelled, "Hey, the mall's closed. You need to leave." No response. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the car. The cold night air bit at my face as I walked toward them. "You hear me? You're trespassing," I called out again, my voice echoing in the empty lot. But before I got within 20 feet, they disappeared, not like they ran away. One second they were there, and the next, gone. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I spun around, scanning the lot with my flashlight, but it was empty. My car was still running behind me, its headlights cutting through the darkness. As I walked back, I felt this heavy, oppressive presence, like someone was watching me from every angle. I climbed into the car and slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. That's when I noticed it. The passenger seatbelt was buckled. My heart nearly stopped. I knew for a fact I hadn't touched it. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, too terrified to look over, but I could feel it. Someone, or something, was sitting there. The radio crackled to life, blasting static so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. I fumbled with the knobs, trying to turn it off, but it wouldn't stop. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The rear-view mirror tilted downward on its own, angling itself to show the back seat. For just a second, I saw a face. Pale, hollow, grinning. I screamed and hit the gas, tearing out of the lot and speeding down the road until the mall was just a distant speck in my rearview mirror. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the lock. I didn't sleep that day. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face staring back at me. The next night, I was ready to call it quits. No job was worth this. But something inside me, maybe pride, maybe stupidity, made me go back. I needed answers. The mall was eerily quiet when I arrived. I parked outside and sat there for a good 10 minutes, just staring at the entrance. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. Inside, the air felt different, heavy, like the mall itself was alive, breathing, watching me, I decided to head toward the maintenance room. I didn't know why, but something was pulling me there. As I walked, the lights flickered above me, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. When I reached the maintenance room, the door was ajar. Inside, the walls were covered in strange marks, scratches, symbols, handprints that looked like they'd been made in ash. My flashlight flickered, and I heard it again, the faint tapping sound. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. No answer. I stepped inside, my flashlight barely holding on, and that's when I saw him. The tall man from the bathroom. He was standing in the corner, his head tilted unnaturally to the side, that same awful grin stretched across his face. "What do you want?" I whispered. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the air around him grew colder, and I felt something deep in my chest, like he was pulling the very breath out of me. I staggered backward, tripping over something on the floor. When I looked down, I saw them. The shoes. The same ones from the bathroom. I scrambled to my feet and bolted out of there, his laughter echoing behind me, deep and hollow and impossibly loud. As I ran through the mall, every light flickered off, plunging me into darkness. I could feel him behind me, his footsteps pounding against the tile, closing in. When I finally burst through the main doors and into the parking lot, the air was still. Silent. I didn't look back. I just got in my car and drove until the sun came up. I quit the next day. No 2 weeks notice, no explanations. I just called my boss, told him I was done, and hung up before he could argue. I didn't care about the paycheck. I didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that mall as possible. For weeks I tried to forget. I convinced myself it was all in my head. Sleep deprivation, stress, too much caffeine. But deep down, I knew better. The nightmares started not long after. Every night I'd see him. The tall man with the hollow eyes and that twisted grin. Sometimes he was standing at the foot of my bed. Sometimes I'd see his reflection in the bathroom mirror. But it was always the same. Watching. Waiting. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of town, thinking maybe I could leave it all behind. For a while, it worked. The nightmares faded, and I started to feel like myself again. Then one night, as I was unpacking a box of old clothes, I found them, the shoes. The same pair I'd seen in the bathroom, in the maintenance room, lying there on the floor like they'd followed me home. My blood ran cold. I grabbed them and threw them in the trash, slamming the lid shut like that would keep them from coming back. But the next morning they were there again, right by my front door, neatly placed side by side, waiting for me. That's when I knew. You can leave the mall, but you can't escape him. I don't know what he is or what he wants, but he's not letting go. I've stopped trying to run. The nightmares, the shadows in the corners of my room, the faint sound of tapping late at night. I've learned to live with them. But every now and then, I see him, standing in the distance, just watching. And I wonder how long I have until he decides it's time to step closer. I always thought working night shifts at a 24/7 store in a shopping mall would be boring. The kind of job where you count minutes, clean shelves, and maybe help a couple of customers too restless to sleep. But on the night I'm about to tell you about, boring would have been a blessing. It started like any other. The mall itself shut down at 9:30 p.m., leaving the halls dark except for the faint glow of the night lights. My store, stuck in the corner near the food court, stayed open all night. 2 entrances. The front, connected to the mall, and the back door for late-night stragglers. I locked the front gate around closing time, like always, leaving just enough of a view of the dimly lit corridor outside. That night felt different, though. The air was heavy, like the building was holding its breath. I chalked it up to my own nerves. I'd been pulling long shifts lately and hadn't been sleeping well. But then, as I was tidying up near the candy aisle, the lights outside flickered, just for a second. I froze, staring at the gate. Something about the flicker felt unnatural, like a warning. I shook it off, grabbed a box of chips, and started restocking the shelves. I told myself it was just old wiring, nothing to worry about. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sound came next, a soft rattling, metal against metal. My eyes darted to the gate, and that's when I saw him. A man stood just beyond the gate, gripping the bars with both hands. He was tall, his clothes baggy and stained, blue jeans, a torn white shirt, and a flannel jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. But it wasn't his clothes that made my stomach twist. It was the way he stood there, perfectly still, staring up at the ceiling like he was in some kind of trance. Hey, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Can I help you with something? Nothing. Not even a flinch. He just kept staring, his hands tightening around the bars. I took a step closer, swallowing the lump in my throat. Sir, the mall is closed, I said, a little louder this time. You can't be here. That's when he moved. Not toward me, but backward, step by slow step, his head still tilted upward. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. He disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, leaving me rooted in place, my heart pounding. I tried to laugh it off, told myself he was probably some lost guy who didn't know where he was. Still, I couldn't shake the way he moved, like he wasn't entirely human. I forced myself to focus on my work, glancing at the gate every few minutes. It stayed quiet for a while, and I started to convince myself that the weirdness was over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was maybe 20 minutes later when I heard the back door slide open. The sound sent a chill down my spine. We didn't get many customers at night, maybe one or two if we were lucky. But after what had just happened, the sound felt more like a threat than an opportunity to make a sale. Hello? I called out, forcing my voice to sound normal. No answer. I walked toward the counter, straining to see who had come in. At first I didn't see anyone, just the aisles stretching out in eerie silence. Then I caught movement at the far end of the drinks aisle. It was him, the same man from before. This time he wasn't at the gate, and he wasn't staring at the ceiling. He was standing completely still, facing away from me. His flannel was gone now, leaving just a stained white t-shirt stretched tight over his bony frame. For a second, I thought he was looking at the shelves. Then I realized his head was tilted slightly to the side, like he was listening for something. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice shaking. "You can't be here. The store's closed to the mall. You need to leave." He didn't move, not even a flinch. I grabbed the store's phone, my fingers trembling as I punched in the number for security. It rang and rang, but no one picked up. "Of course," I muttered under my breath. When I looked back up, he was gone. I didn't hear him move, didn't see where he went. One second he was there, and the next the aisle was empty. I walked cautiously around the counter, trying to convince myself he'd left through the back door. But when I looked at the door, it was still closed. My heart was pounding as I checked the aisles one by one. Each step felt like walking into a trap. The store was too quiet, and every shadow seemed to stretch just a little too far. When I reached the last aisle, I saw it, his flannel shirt. It was crumpled on the floor right where he'd been standing. The sight of it made my stomach turn. That's when I heard it. A low, raspy laugh. It came from somewhere near the back of the store. I spun around, my eyes darting to every corner, but I didn't see anything. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The laughter stopped abruptly, like whoever, or whatever, it was wanted me to know they were still in control. I backed away slowly, making my way toward the counter. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I didn't want to turn my back on whatever was out there. Then, just as I reached the counter, I saw movement on the security monitor. The man was back, but he wasn't in the store. He was standing in the mall corridor again, staring directly into one of the cameras. And he was smiling. It wasn't just any smile, though. His mouth stretched impossibly wide, his teeth yellow and sharp. It was the kind of smile that made your blood run cold. I froze, my hand hovering over the phone. What could I even do? Call the cops? Lock myself in the back room? I didn't know, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just some lost guy. The smile on the monitor didn't move, but it felt like he was staring straight into my soul. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the store phone again and tried calling security one more time. The line rang endlessly before cutting off with a static-filled click. "Damn it," I muttered, slamming the phone down. I glanced back at the monitor, but now the screen was empty. He was gone. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my manager had made it clear. Leaving the store unattended at night would mean losing my job. Still, I couldn't ignore the icy grip of fear tightening around me. Suddenly, the back door jingled again. This time, it wasn't the slow, deliberate slide from before. It slammed open with a force that made the nearby shelves rattle. I turned, heart racing, and saw him standing there. He was closer now, just a few feet from the counter. His grin was even wider than before, stretching unnaturally across his face. His eyes gleamed with something dark, something that didn't belong in a human being. "Stay back!" I yelled, grabbing a broom from behind the counter. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "I'll call the cops, I swear." He tilted his head to the side, his smile never faltering. "Call them," he said, his voice low and guttural. "They won't listen." I felt the room spin. His words hit me like a gut punch. How could he know I'd already tried? I backed away slowly, broom clutched in both hands like it would actually protect me. Then he moved. Not toward me, but to the side, disappearing into one of the aisles. The silence that followed was deafening. My breathing was loud and uneven as I tried to figure out where he went. Every shadow seemed alive, every flicker of light a potential threat. I couldn't stay out there any longer. I bolted for the back room, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving. For a moment, all I could hear was my own panicked breathing. Then, the tapping started. It was soft at first, almost playful, like he was toying with me. The sound of his fingers gently brushing against the wood sent chills racing down my spine. "Go away!" I screamed, my voice shaking. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate laugh echoed from the other side of the door. I backed away, my eyes darting around the small room. There was no other way out, no windows, no vents, just the door and the nightmare waiting on the other side. I grabbed my phone and tried dialing 911. This time the line connected. 911, what's your emergency?" a calm voice asked. "There's a man in my store," I blurted out. "He's not right, he's dangerous, I'm trapped in the back room." "Stay on the line," the operator said, "officers are on their way." But I didn't feel safe. Not yet. The tapping started again, louder this time, more aggressive. The door rattled in its frame, and I felt tears sting my eyes. "Please hurry," I whispered. Then, as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. The silence was worse. I held my breath, waiting for something. Anything. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, I heard the faint crackle of a radio outside. The police. I threw open the back door and stumbled out into the store, relief washing over me as I saw 2 officers standing near the counter. But when I turned to point out where he'd been, the store was empty. The officers searched the mall, but they didn't find him. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The next morning, I showed the security footage to my manager. She paled as we watched the video together. Every detail was there. His smile, his movements, even the moment he looked into the camera and waved. Then the screen went black. The footage from the moment he entered the store to the time the police arrived was completely gone. "You're sure this wasn't some prank?" my manager asked, her voice trembling. I didn't bother answering. I quit the job that day. Whatever that man was, he wasn't human, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what he wanted. But even now, I can't stop thinking about his smile, or the way he seemed to know everything. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear that tapping. I don't know why we thought it was a good idea. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was Evan's twisted sense of adventure, but that night still feels like a nightmare I can't wake up from. It was a random Wednesday in October, cool, quiet, and just a little eerie. We didn't have school the next day, so naturally Evan suggested we do something epic. Crestwood Mall, he said with a grin that told me he wasn't kidding. We sneak in, check it out, and we're out in like an hour. Think about it. People will talk about this forever. I hesitated. The place was infamous. Everyone in town had heard the stories, disappearances, strange lights, people claiming to hear whispers coming from inside. It had been abandoned for over a decade, left to rot after the economy tanked. Still, something about Evan's excitement pulled me in. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We pulled up to the mall just after 11 p.m. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, a ghost of the busy place it used to be. Most of the windows were boarded up, but graffiti-covered walls peeked through the gaps. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. "Come on, don't chicken out now," Evan teased, nudging me as we walked toward a rusted side door. It had been pried open long ago, the wood splintered and bent. He gave me that signature grin. Piece of cake. I followed him inside, my flashlight cutting through the thick, stale air. The smell hit me first, damp, moldy, with a faint metallic tang. The darkness swallowed everything beyond the beam of light, making the wide open space feel like a cave. For fun, or maybe to freak me out, Evan turned off his flashlight. "Dude, check this out," he said, his voice echoing. "It's like nothing exists here." I switched mine off too, just for a second. The darkness was so complete it felt alive. "Okay, enough," I said, turning it back on. "Let's just stick together." We started exploring the first level, stepping over shattered tiles and scattered debris. Most of the storefronts were gutted, just hollow spaces with broken glass and faded signs. Every once in a while we'd find something intact, an old display, a forgotten mannequin. In one corner there was even a shopping cart tipped on its side, rusted and forgotten. Then we heard it. A metallic scraping sound, faint but distinct, coming from deeper in the mall. I froze. "What was that?" I whispered. "Relax," Evan said, waving it off. "Probably just the wind or something falling over." But there was no wind, and nothing had fallen. We moved toward the second level, climbing the broken escalators. The upper floor was worse, more debris, more shadows, and a cold, damp air that made my skin prickle. I tried not to think about the stories, the whispers people claimed to hear, but my mind wouldn't stop. We shone our flashlights around, catching glimpses of closed-up stores. A bookshop still had shelves full of rotting books. A toy store had rows of dusty action figures lined up like they were waiting for someone to buy them. Then it happened again, the metallic scrape, louder this time. Evan stopped, his flashlight swinging toward the sound. "Okay, that's not wind," he admitted. "Do you think it's security or cops?" I asked, my voice shaking. Evan shook his head. "They don't patrol this place anymore. It's probably just some other idiots like us." We decided to move in the opposite direction, keeping our lights low. The sound came again, closer this time, a long, slow drag of metal against tile. My chest tightened as we neared an old department store, its entrance blocked by overturned shelves. Suddenly, Evan grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded. It wasn't the scraping this time. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and getting closer. We killed our flashlights and crouched behind a pile of debris. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I heard it. My name, whispered, faint, but unmistakable. "Chris, this way." It sounded like Evan, but he was right next to me. I turned, confused, but Evan just shook his head. I didn't say anything. The whisper came again, further down the hall. "Chris, hurry." My legs felt like lead, but I started moving toward the sound, drawn by something I couldn't explain. Evan grabbed my arm. "Where are you going? Don't!" "It's probably just..." I didn't finish the sentence because deep down I didn't know what it was. I just kept walking, my flashlight off, the whispers pulling me forward. When I reached the end of the hall, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. "Evan?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I stepped closer, reaching out. My fingers brushed fabric, rough, coarse, not like the hoodie Evan was wearing. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure turned, and the beam of my flashlight revealed his face, or rather his mask. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a ski mask and a beanie. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and emotionless. Before I could scream, he lunged at me, grabbing my wrist and twisting it hard. I dropped the flashlight, the world plunging into darkness. He shoved me against the wall, his grip like steel. "Evan," I yelled, struggling to break free. Out of nowhere, Evan appeared, swinging his flashlight like a weapon. It connected with the man's head, making a sickening thud. He stumbled, loosening his grip just enough for me to slip away. "Run," Evan yelled, and we took off, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing behind us. We reached the escalator, but the man was right behind us. "This way," Evan shouted, leading me toward the food court stairs. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they were giving out, but fear kept me moving. When we reached the lower level, we bolted for the door we came through, only to find it chained shut. "No, no, no!" Evan yelled, pulling at the lock. "It wasn't like this before." The footsteps were getting closer. I turned, my heart sinking as the man emerged from the shadows. His mask was gone now, revealing a face that was both calm and terrifying, like he knew he had us cornered. Evan grabbed a broken piece of metal from the ground and swung it wildly. The man dodged, grabbing Evan by the shirt and slamming him into the wall. Without thinking, I picked up a heavy chunk of debris and threw it at his head. It hit, hard enough to make him stagger. "Come on," I yelled, pulling Evan to his feet. We ran toward a service hallway, bursting through a rusted door that led outside. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but I didn't stop running until we reached the car. Evan fumbled with the keys, and we sped out of there, not stopping until we were miles away. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Evan broke the silence. "We're never talking about this again." I nodded, but I knew I'd never forget. And sometimes when it's late and the house is quiet, I can still hear that metallic scrape. Somewhere out there, he's still waiting. You know how they tell you that a college degree is your golden ticket to success? Yeah, well, that's a lie. I learned it the hard way after graduation, sitting in my tiny apartment, watching my savings drain away while rejection emails piled up. 6 months. 6 whole months of applying to gaming studios, tech companies, hell, even startups halfway across the globe. Nothing. I was running out of options and worse, out of cash. That's when desperation kicked in. I needed a job, any job, and fast. Scrolling through listings late one night, I stumbled on a post. Video game store clerk wanted, flexible hours. It wasn't glamorous, but it was better than going broke. The store was in this old mall, the kind of place you go to when Amazon's shipping takes too long. You know the vibe. Dim lighting, weird smells, and half the shop's already boarded up. Still, I had experience with games, so I applied. 2 days later, I was hired. The mall itself was something out of a time capsule. It even had these hidden service corridors running behind the stores meant for janitors and deliveries. At first, they seemed like a quirky relic of the past, but soon, I'd learned they were far more than that. I started as a part-timer, but within a year, I'd climbed the ranks to assistant manager. It wasn't because I was some corporate prodigy. The turnover rate was insane. People came and went like clockwork. My job was simple. Keep things running and don't ask too many questions. Then Megan got hired. She was the kind of girl who turned heads without even trying. Everyone noticed her, and unfortunately, so did her boyfriend. This guy was a walking bad decision, always hanging around, always watching her. He had this intensity that made you think he'd snap if the wind blew the wrong way. Megan didn't seem to mind, though. If anything, she seemed to enjoy the chaos. Then she discovered the service corridors. To her, they weren't just shortcuts. They were an escape. During breaks, she'd vanish into them, always reappearing with a smug grin, like she'd gotten away with something. At the time, I thought it was harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was during one of those holiday shifts, the kind that makes you question your life choices, that Megan didn't come back from her break. We were slammed, so no one noticed at first. By the time things calmed down, someone asked, "Hey, has anyone seen Megan?" She wasn't in the break room. She wasn't on the floor. And when we checked the corridors, empty. I figured she'd bailed. Retail jobs aren't exactly known for employee loyalty, and Megan seemed like the type to ghost without a second thought. So, we moved on. 2 days later, the cops showed up. They were asking about Megan, when we'd last seen her, if she'd said anything unusual. Her parents had reported her missing after she didn't come home that night. That's when they mentioned her boyfriend. He disappeared too, leaving behind a trashed apartment and zero clues. The cops seemed to think they'd run off together. I wasn't so sure. Weeks passed. The mall returned to its usual routine, and Megan became just another face on a missing persons poster. Then February rolled around and the story took a dark turn. Workers were clearing out an empty store to prep for a new tenant. It was one of those spaces no one had touched in years, filled with dusty displays and leftover junk. That's when they found the smell. At first they thought it was old food or maybe a dead rat in the walls. But the smell didn't go away. They kept digging. Behind a heavy display rack, they found a piece of plywood covering a small storage room. When they pried it open, the stench hit them like a freight train. Inside, they found her, Megan, or what was left of her. Her body was curled up in the corner, facing the wall. The Arizona heat had dried her out, preserving her like some kind of macabre relic. It was horrifying. And just like that, the mall was buzzing with rumors. Everyone had a theory, but the most popular one was obvious. The boyfriend. The cops didn't waste time digging into Megan's life. That's when the stories started to surface. She hadn't just been using the corridors to escape her boyfriend. She'd been meeting someone else, a guy from another store, clean-cut, quiet, the type you'd never suspect. He admitted to sneaking off with her during breaks, but when asked about the night she vanished, he clammed up. He swore he didn't know anything, but his fear told a different story. Here's the thing, though. Megan and I had a history, too. It wasn't serious, just a fling, really. She'd been the one to suggest using the corridors, and we'd slipped away more than a few times. Looking back, I can't believe how reckless we were. If her boyfriend had caught us, well, let's just say I wouldn't be telling this story. When the cops started asking questions, I kept my mouth shut. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I knew the boyfriend. He was unpredictable, violent. If he'd killed Megan, there was no telling what he'd do to anyone else she'd been with, including me. The investigation dragged on, but they never found the boyfriend. Some think he skipped town. Others think he's dead. Me? I don't care. As long as he's gone, I can sleep at night. Sort of. Even now, years later, I can't walk past those service corridors without feeling a chill. Megan wasn't perfect, far from it, but she didn't deserve what happened to her. She was just looking for someone to treat her right, someone who wasn't a monster. In the end, though, the mall swallowed her whole, and I've been trying to forget ever since.